Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be, and welcome to a post on capturing the fingerprint of the zeitgeist. Sometimes, like anyone, I struggle, and I'm usually okay, but sometimes systematic betrayal really rattles me, or it lowers my energy level. Even when it has happened many times, it still gets to you. How ironic it is that this condition has arisen due to a mental health thought leader stealing my literary work. I am, of course, talking again about The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, a book that took 45 sequential plot elements from My Adorable Apotheosis, which I published back in 2017, and he published his book in 2020, 2 years later. So this is just one of those things that I've been forced to see about how the publishing industry works that I'd rather not see. It's nicer to just look out at the world and see justice and, all the good things. The internet in particular forces us to see lots of things that we'd rather not see. I once watched a man get shot in his back in front of his children. I watched a place I once lived on fire in these riots recently. I watched a man lie to his wife about anything and everything, just based on, you see people's behavior on the internet. And like everyone, I learn how to handle this sort of information. But it takes work, and it takes work for all of us. It's emotional work, and for me, that emotional work often comes in the form of a story that quarantines all of my fears in the fictional realm. When such a story manages to quarantine all of the fears that are circulating within a given moment, it is a story that has captured the fingerprint of the zeitgeist. These fingerprints are rare and valuable because they put into words the things that we are often too afraid to say to ourselves. When you see something bad, you often have to just kind of filter it out in order to keep going about your life. But in order to feel like the world still makes sense, you have to put all of those things into a context, which is often done through narrative. So these unique fingerprints, these fingerprints of the zeitgeist, are the reason that when people say there are no new stories, they are always wrong. The present day is not like the present day 100 years ago, or even 10 years ago, or even yesterday. So there are new stories. They're happening all of the time. But when you encounter a new story, something that surprises you, often in a negative way, you have to think to figure out what's going on. When I first saw that my work kept getting ripped off, my published stories, that they kept showing up in different places under the names of other authors who had clearly used my work as a template to construct their ripoff without crediting me. You start out, you see one and you feel suspicious. You're like, did this just happen? Did it really just happen? And then you're surprised. You can't believe this is happening again. And then I deal with it by just going into analysis mode and trying to quantify everything that's happening. But eventually you get stuck with the emotions. And for me, it's always a delayed reaction. I've gone through this process several times. Every time I find a book that has clearly used my work to generate theirs while they're pretending that they didn't use it. And I'm not talking about just taking, 5 or 10 ideas out of a book. I'm talking about a person who sat there and just flipped through and said, "Oh, what happens next?" and then wrote another chapter in their book, you know? So I didn't, when this happened the first time, I didn't think I could do much about it because there wasn't very much money at stake. But since the Midnight Library garnered an $800,000 advance, I thought it would be easy to find a law firm to go after the bounty, and that I really don't have an excuse to not try to pursue this. It's not quite as easy as you would think, but I haven't quite given up yet. I am angry, of course, to learn that the book publishing industry is such a sham, that you send your work to agents and it gets fed into a system where everybody steals it and you get nothing out of it. It's disappointing to learn that my voice only makes it to the surface to other people when it's filtered by men who have invested lots of money in selling a product that I developed while cutting me out of the loop. And it seems that the entire industry is constructed to work like that. Unless you have a heavy hitter on your side, you have no way to, defend your ownership of your work. So both of them, the first two plagiarists, both of these first two men, they dumbed down what was for me a personal story, and they stripped away some side plots that made men look bad. So not only do we have a system that steals, but it also twists the message of the original authors of the products. They kept what was the unique fingerprint of my story, the fingerprint of the zeitgeist, because that was very valuable. And it's infuriating to me on every level that this is how the world works. Of course, everybody knows there's lots of injustice in the world, but to do your work and just live your life, you can't pay too much attention to it because it'll get you down. But the people who have been victims, they have to do something about it. Otherwise, they know that this is just going to keep happening to other people. And so you have to confront it and get comfortable with it. Just sit down with your friend in justice and say, okay, this is how we're going to have to deal with this. It's not even, at a certain point, it's not about money. It's just you want to fix the systematic injustice. If a structural plagiarism detection algorithm can do that, then an algorithm is really what we need to implement, or we need to give individual authors the tools to fight back against systematic injustice. And if someday I can help other people use such an algorithm to defend their work, I think I would feel like I've contributed something good to the world. So, Matt Haig got an $800,000 advance for copying what was really good about my book. And if J.K. Rowling could win an EU copyright case against a book that was basically Harry Potter set in Russia with Russianized characters, Russianized spells, a female protagonist, and a female villain, I think that I should be able to win too. The first time that this problem happened to me, the guy was just a self-publishing nobody and not really worth the money, but this is different somehow. And it's been happening. He isn't the first one. Now there's a woman who published with, there was a woman who published traditionally. It was her debut novel. And she didn't steal nearly as much, but you could tell that she was using this as a reference or as a source, and that's just bad style. For a debut novel, that's not okay. There was another woman who basically took the first two-thirds of her book followed the plot of mine point for point, same rhythm, everything, and then she kind of sandwiched in a little bit of some different material, and then brought it back and concluded it in the same way that I concluded my story. That also wasn't okay. She's also a debut novelist with a large publishing house. I think was she with, I can't remember. And then there was the most recent one, which was a sort of high concept literary book that came out from Bloomsbury, that a place where I submitted my novel back in 2017 and again in 2018. And it just, I mean, it's different in style, but it took the key ideas and took them in sequence and took a lot of them. I mean, more than 14. So there's just this really bad pattern here that you submit your work to the system and a big name, brand name, comes out with a version of your story. It's horrible. I published my book 2 years ago, but since then I've learned that there are only about 100 English-speaking authors who make considerable amounts of money by publishing books through publishing houses. For the millions, and there are millions, who write stories and beg for attention from literary agents, they are either given chump change, nothing, or their work is stolen and repackaged by a ghostwriter who hands it off to a big brand name. And I had no idea that this is the system I'm dealing with, but I mean, they make 200 debut novelists per year. So it's kind of like those are the people who have been admitted to the system in a tryout phase. And then there are only 100 who are really successful year after year. Those 200 are trying to get into one of those choice positions at the top of the pyramid, and only less than half of those 200 each year get any kind of connection to the publishing industry after their first, say, 4-year contract is over. So it's like if you get your first golden ticket, you only have less than 50% chance of making it to the next round. And then after the next round, you only have a 50% chance, and so on. And at each round, you don't make very much money. And yeah, it's a pretty raw deal. When writers, so in short, the whole industry, it's constructed like a black hole for all of our nervous writerly energy. But I don't think that the people who constructed this industry thought about the unintended consequences. When writers eventually see that they get nothing out of it, the black hole of nervous energy might turn into a volcano, and it's far better to be honest with people about the systems that they're dealing with. I saw the same sort of black hole of dishonesty in the system of academic physics, where they train far too many people for far too few leadership jobs. So there are only a few professors, but there are so many PhD students, and it sets people up for disappointment. And if writers really understood that that's how the industry worked, they would boycott the whole system and encourage readers to do the same. And if they learned how much of the industry is funded by money laundering, maybe it's not a big loss. But, I mean, then you're stuck with Amazon. You're stuck with Amazon, and you don't like having a monopoly there either, because they certainly don't enforce copyright. They say, go do it yourself. Ouch. So let's see if I can continue this from further away. There. I had a little story that I was at the end of this one, but I don't think I'll read it aloud. It makes me look rather negative in my outlook, and I don't feel completely negative about everything in life. But if you'd like to read it, go ahead and click on the blog post, and until next time, thank you for watching.